Greetings one and all, I'm Red Angel, and welcome to another episode of Late Night Ponderings, my series of mini editorials that covers a wide range of subjects. Today's subject? Similar Sinews, the Dark Souls problem. Oh, Dark Souls, what a wicked web you've weaved across the gaming landscape. You've tortured countless gamers over the years, and yet they keep coming back for more punishment despite what you've put them through. I too find myself doing this, as Dark Souls, despite its difficulty, is an exhilarating challenge that keeps me coming back for more, and I'm not the only one that feels this way. That being said, the love of Dark Souls' difficulty has created a rather interesting corruption of how criticism works in the gaming community. This, of course, would be comparing almost every single game to Dark Souls. It's been going on for quite some time, and not just among game journalists. Just ask the Twitter account xmeetsdarksouls, who has helpfully categorized some of the most ludicrous examples of this. And now, a dramatic reading of tweets by Red Angel. Received PS4 Portal Knights package from Spike Chunsoft. Thank you. That game looks really cool! Like Minecraft meets Dark Souls! Such a good game! Loving how it's almost like Dark Souls meets Undertale. Hashtag Nintendo Switch! Interesting. Hashtag Assassin's Creed Origins looks like it has a new combat system much like Dark Souls.
New Assassin's Creed Origins combat looks a lot like Dark Souls. Cannot wait! Smiley winky emoticon thing.
New Assassin's Creed combat looks like Dark Souls, except you can fook up and not die. It's like Dark Souls but in Africa.
It's just like Dark Souls. The combat looks like Dark Souls.
This concludes our dramatic reading. The situation isn't helped by the gaming press's insistence on comparing other games to Dark Souls when they are difficult. This has seemingly come to a head when a journalist at Games Radar covered the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, stating the following. But then there's death. There's just no escaping it. There might be brand new death animations to keep you entertained. Oh look, I've been swallowed by a lion again. But there's no way of avoiding that the controls just mean that Crash Bandicoot has become Dark Souls. It has, of course, spawned internet memes in the same vein as something like 7 out of 10 too much water, the IGN journalist meme that came from a few years ago. Nonetheless, this got me thinking a lot more critically about this sort of problem, because this isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it certainly won't be the last. Journalists often compare games to other games in order to paint a fuller picture of the title itself for their readers, listeners, or watchers, and for the most part, it tends to be met without much complaint. The general public do it all the time, especially when the game they are comparing it to seemingly came before it or is more popular than the game in question. For example, look at this recommended review for the game One Shot over on Steam. Like Undertale, this game is about a young child trying to get home after falling into a land of strange creatures while being blessed with a video game power. However, while Undertale is bright and cheery, One Shot is quiet and somber. If you liked Undertale, give it a shot! What sort of picture does this paint for you? For any of you who didn't immediately look up One Shot when I mentioned it. It paints a game similar to that of Undertale in the way that it was said, right? What you might not know is that One Shot actually came before Undertale, with One Shot being entered in 2014's Indie Game Maker contest and being available later that year, while Undertale was released in 2015. This is not taking into account the Steam release for One Shot because the full game was initially released for free. Yet, most people don't know that, and the reviewer used a game that everyone is familiar with, like Undertale, to sculpt a bigger picture of a smaller, lesser-known game at the time of its paid-for launch. When people compare something, it's to take something unfamiliar up against something familiar and help others draw conclusions based off of the data they've given them. It's why there's a number of people who will compare any indie RPG that comes out now to Undertale because it is popular and familiar, and they want to see how it stacks up to a game that was widely received in a positive light. People often have this first game set into their psyche as a bar that every title following it must measure up to. This leads to countless comparisons like this, and it has the potential to trip people up who, when seeing something that has similar gameplay, might focus on comparing primarily to that. Doing so has the chance to completely disregard key elements such as themes of the story, which can be drastically different as well as considerably more complex. Unfortunately, Dark Souls has become the measure for many when it comes to difficulty, and, for good or for ill, there are those who will always compare it. Soulsian has become an adjective in many gamers' dictionary in order to describe something difficult, and it seems to have created a splinter genre in games. They aren't games that journalists tout as being difficult as, but games that have taken genuine inspiration from Dark Souls and decided to make money off of it, with many trying to put their own interesting spins on it. A good example of this being Nioh, the samurai game that was released earlier this year by Team Ninja. The director even acknowledges this in his interview with Eurogamer after he was asked if Dark Souls was what changed the game's direction. Yes, it did have a big impact on the direction this project eventually took. We have very, very high opinions on the Souls series, and it's captivated a very wide audience, even in Japan. Also, fundamentally, that the game is very difficult, very challenging, yet very well done and refined as a great action game. That part is in common with the past Team Ninja titles, so we did take some inspirations from Dark Souls. Including Nioh, there are now many games that are part of this new genre. For example, there's Dark Mouse, which uses a similar checkpoint system, along with dark, unsettling environments where the player is heavily outmatched by the hordes of enemies and has to memorize their attack patterns in order to strategize how to defeat them. Souls itself has created a whole subgenre that has been received generally well, so these games relish in the fact that they're being compared to such a defining game. Yet, even with all of this in mind, the similar sinews that have been choking the gaming community still exist. People will compare games to other games that they may not even resemble as a way to generally gauge things like difficulty, quality of art design, gameplay, length, and even writing. It has happened and will happen for as long as any form of media exists, since it brings to mind something familiar for you to draw from in order to further extrapolate on it. Not all comparisons are inherently bad, but they can just lead to a kind of criticism that doesn't warrant much merit in the long run. This goes for people as well, especially those who create content. Musicians, writers, artists, and even YouTube content creators have been measured next to those who either came first or are just drastically more popular than they are. Or maybe it's a question of style and how you prefer one style over the other, or how in your opinion you'd like their content a lot better if they were like the other creator. It's not uncommon to see less popular creators compared to not only those who are more popular than they are, but even to each other. I've already talked about how we set a standard in our heads when it comes to video games, but it doesn't stop there. We measure people's inherent worth compared to how they measure up to another person. Then we may try to justify this, stating it's for the creator's own good, so they have something to strive for in order to get better. But have you ever thought of it also maybe setting an impossible bar that they never may reach? The media-consuming public appears to struggle with how they measure things without making a direct comparison. This brings to light the rather sad state of affairs we are in, where we can't help but put people in competition with each other even if we like their content. Now, if people are comparing everything to Dark Souls, Undertale, or the next big popular thing, how are you supposed to respond to these sort of people? I have a very simple suggestion. Don't respond to them! From the point of view of someone who has worked in game journalism, the majority of time I used comparisons was to explain something better, but I've tried to avoid using only these. Too many comparisons at once detracts from the overall article if you're putting Venn diagrams everywhere. Metaphors and similes are great, but it's best to use them in places that are appropriate and without excess. While it may make your article easier to write, and trust me, it does, easier doesn't necessarily mean higher quality. Of course, if you put something like Dark Souls in your title, it's more likely that people are going to look at your article. Who knows, maybe they'll make an obnoxious meme that ups the site's ad revenue, propelling your article into infamy, and actually helping perpetuate the troublesome mindset that everything has to be compared to something in order for it to hold any value for people to understand it! It's like the multiple memes I've seen splayed across social media platforms about this are actually encouraging journalists to use more tactics like this in order to get paid and praised by their editors. But while it might create short-term incentives, it's only weakening your credibility as a whole in the long run. Think of it like fire. You don't add more tinder to it in order to get it to stop, you douse it with water. In this case, you're better off if you cover it with glass and deprive it of oxygen until it flickers, then slowly goes out. Now that's how you use a comparison to its full potential. I'm Red Angel, and I'll see you next time.